Welcome back to Intelligent Investment Today, the podcast concerned with all things value investment. In each episode, we consider a different idea and look to see how the value framework, as laid down by the father of the craft, Benjamin Graham, can shed light on the matter at hand. In today's episode, we will be considering how the application of Graham's value approach has been successfully applied in other areas beside the financial markets. Specifically, we'll be looking at the interesting case of Billy Beane, who applied a very Graham-like framework to the selection not of stocks, but of baseball players. We'll consider what he did to turn the Oakland Athletics from a struggling team with a small budget into one that went on to challenge the biggest and richest names in the sport. So strap in, kick back, and get ready for another dose of value investment as prescribed by Benjamin Graham. The name Billy Beane is unlikely to need much in the way of introduction for our listeners over in North America. For other nations where baseball is not the national obsession, unless you happen to have seen the movie Moneyball, all about Beane's real-life exploits, it might very well be a name that is unfamiliar to you. In the 1990s, Billy Beane was a scout and latterly general manager for the Oakland Athletics, a middling-sized baseball team based in Oakland, California. The A's, as they're commonly known, unlike their bigger, more mainstream rivals, did not have the luxury of a large budget to pay the wages of the game's superstars. So Beane knew that in order to compete, he would need to think outside the box. In its recruitment of players, baseball at this time almost universally operated on objective appraisals. If this player or that player appeared superficially to be the superstar who won all the plaudits, then the top teams would spend whatever was necessary to obtain that player's signature. In this way, it is little like the propensity of investors to throw money into what appears, on the surface at least, to be that particular day's most glamorous, attractive and fashionable business. Beane knew very well the A's could not compete when it came to paying the highest wages, so instead he looked to the data in order to highlight the players whose talents were not fully recognised, or who had been discriminated against due to other factors. Fortunately for Beane, there already existed copious amounts of data related to player performance in the baseball leagues. The field of baseball analytics has a long history, with statisticians taking an interest in the game as far back as the 1800s. But it really began to gain momentum and become much more advanced as computers made the capture of performance data much easier. But whilst data was abundant and readily available, most scouts still preferred the traditional gut instinct approach to player assessment, in the same way that many participants in the stock market prefer to ignore the quantitative data and rely instead upon what feels like the right company in which to invest. Baseball scouts, like many investors, widely considered the facts and figures to be something of a pernicious distraction. This reality gifted Beane a wide pool of players from which to choose, players whose stats indicated their effectiveness, but for various reasons had been overlooked by scouting teams more interested in the qualitative picture. There were many reasons why a statistically successful player may have been overlooked by the system. They may have been considered too old, too short, too fat, too thin, or too ugly, or just not possessing that star quality, the star quality required to sell replica shirts or sell out stadiums. This, of course, should sound like a familiar situation, for it is a state of affairs that we see all the time in the stock markets. Objectively attractive businesses whose financial showing indicates that they should be selling for much more than they actually are, overlooked for reasons that are often quite arbitrary. It might be that the business is seen as a legacy one whose best days are behind it, or one that is operating in a cyclical industry that is currently suffering a downturn. Beane, like the value investor considering the purchase of some company or another, would look at the players' performance data going back a number of years and ascertain which ones were available for less than they were truly worth. In other words, those who offered the best value for money. Unlike the value investor, Beane would only consider the qualitative factors to the extent that they did not completely make void the quantitative picture. Sometimes Beane's signings might very well have been the cigar butts that Graham was so fond of. Superficially unattractive propositions, but ones that have one puff left in them, and this puff could be had for next to nothing. This was the case with players who may well have been past their peak and discarded by the bigger teams, but with the prospect that they still had one good season left in the tank, And this was a season that the A's could get very cheaply indeed. It is, of course, demonstrably true that, like baseball scouts, concerned primarily about the qualitative outlook, investment decisions in the stock market are constantly swayed and influenced by factors that ultimately prove unimportant to the underlying worth of a business. Just like a scout may consciously or unconsciously judge that a player is not fit to join their team because they are not 6'5", investors can also get caught up far too easily in the irrelevant or the trivial. Consider the fact that people really do invest in companies that make a product they like the taste of, say, or a fashion business because they like the clothes they make, or an automobile business because they are fans of their particular cars. And whilst it is always nice to invest in something you love, the fact that you're a fan of the product or not is, in the grand scheme of things, completely irrelevant when it comes to the price you should be paying for it. The process of Beane's Moneyball technique to uncover overlooked or unloved baseball players does therefore show remarkable similarities to the Benjamin Graham approach of examining the data to find businesses that are trading at less than they should be, whilst simultaneously disregarding subjective opinions on qualitative aspects. Billy Beane confirmed it himself that his approach to baseball analysis is practically identical to what Graham's prodigy, Warren Buffett, does at Berkshire Hathaway. He said, "If you look at everything Warren and Charlie say, if you take the word investing out and put baseball in, every sentence still works." So we can see that Beane, in looking to uncover baseball players trading at below their true worth, displays exactly the same behaviours as the value investor, the focus being on hard data rather than hearsay, rumour or mere opinion. His approach also includes the patience and discipline to resist the temptation to overpay, as well as the conviction to employ independent thought and not follow the crowd, whilst all the while showing temperamental hard-headedness to stay calm and rational when under pressure. Billy Beane may not have been the first person to use performance data to dispassionately uncover bargain opportunities in the world of baseball, but he was certainly its first high-profile proponent. With Beane's involvement in the formerly underachieving Oakland A's, they went on to achieve 7 regional titles, despite having one of the lowest wage bills in the sport. His success has popularised the art of quantitative analysis in not just baseball, but in sport more generally. In the past, soccer teams, like baseball ones, previously relied for its selection of players all too often on the gut instincts of the chief scouts. Instead, today we see much more reliance on data-driven decisions. It is no longer enough for a scout to expect their club owner to stump up the cash for players based on mere opinion alone. They will invariably insist on historic data to back up the purchase. In this way, sports teams, it appears, have evolved in a way that participants in the stock market have not. The typical investor is still seemingly just as happy as they ever have been to invest large sums of money in a business without any regard to historic performance or financial data. They, like the baseball coaches of yore, often forget to ask how much. That is all for today's podcast. I hope that the analogy of Billy Beane and the Oakland A's brings home the intellectual heft behind the Graham approach to value investment. By using the techniques laid down by Graham and applying statistical evidence and logic to their decisions, practitioners, whether they be applying their trade in the stock market or on the sports field, can durably outperform and profit from the foolishness of others. I do highly recommend reading the book Moneyball, The Art of Winning an Unfair Game by Michael Lewis, as a way to back up what we've discussed here today, as well if you like the motion picture inspired by it. If you've enjoyed the show, please do consider adding to playlist. That way you'll be alerted the moment any new editions drop. I'm David Coombs. This has been Intelligent Investment Today. Until next time, stay safe and happy investing.